Hey, everybody, welcome back to Engaging the Phenomenon. And today we are honored to have our guest, Sean Esböjn-Hargens. Welcome, Sean.
Hey, great to be here, James. Totally excited to explore and see where we go in our conversation.
Yeah, and so people may be familiar that you actually attended one of our conferences, an inquiry into anomalous experiences in the phenomenon. But you're also well noted for founding something called the Exo Studies Institute. So,
Yeah.
can you just so people watching and listening can have an idea, give a little background on yourself, maybe some of your background in education and how you got involved with discussing subjects like exo studies and the UFO phenomenon.
Yeah, for sure. So I was very involved with integral theory, an approach developed by an American philosopher named Ken Wilber. And it has a strong emphasis on the non dual contemplative traditions. It develops a number of frameworks for basically integrating and including a lot of different types of insight and wisdom from, all kinds of disciplines. So it's kind of a meta interdisciplinary approach. And so, this was my main professional focus. I was running a graduate school program, a master's degree online in this, as well as a campus based program in integral psychology. And in the integral psychology program, for example, we studied like 10 major different schools of psychology and really looked at what are the insights about the human being that each of these schools bring to the table, and where do they go wrong in assuming that their approach is the best approach or the only approach or whatever, right? So we, like these different kind of camps, right? And why does that happen, and like how do we take an integral approach to really benefit, because the human being's a very complex reality, and each of these schools of thought have some really amazing insight about the nature of human minds and hearts, and how we operate, how we deal with trauma, how we transform and develop over time, right? So I've always been interested in like these big kind of integrative approaches to topics. And just like another example, my PhD, which is focused on environmental studies, I use this kind of approach to look at ecology and environmental science, and I identified 200 different schools of thought, 80 of which are schools of ecology. Like we often think that like there's one school of ecology, like, oh, there's ecology. No, there's behavioral ecology, there's evolutionary ecology, there's community dynamics ecology, there's systems ecology, and all of them have like a different view of how to understand, organisms in relationship to their environment. And kind of my attitude was, the earth is on fire, like we got to do something. Each of these different schools of ecology have something important to tell us about how we might work together to create a better world and preserve the natural environment, right? And so this is what I was doing, right? This was my life. And I've been a long-term meditator, particularly Tibetan Buddhism and contemplative Christianity and Diamond Approach. And Diamond Approach is kind of a a school of practice that H. Almas has developed. It's very popular in the Boulder area in Colorado and the San Francisco area in California. My wife's actually become a teacher in that tradition. So I've been working in a number of different contemplative traditions, thinking big pictures, and through a series of experiences, I basically started having encounters with non-human intelligences. And so then I was like trying to make sense of this. Like, okay, what's going on? And I connected. I started because in my integral community, you know, even though it was integral, it didn't include this piece, right? It did not include the UFO phenomenon, ETs, or even nature intelligences or angels, celestial beings. So, in spite of its integral approach, there were important parts of reality, in effect, it was leaving out. And so this led me to start to share more with people my experiences. And as I did, a lot of people in my community were saying, I've also had an experience like that, or I've had an experience like this. And I was really surprised. I was like, oh my gosh, these are people I've known for 10 years and 15 years, and they've never told me basically their contact experiences, even though we've shared kind of every other kind of experience. Like we talk about our ayahuasca trips or our, intense Tibetan Buddhist experiences. And so I got really curious, like, why are we not talking about our contact experiences? And that led me to create, the Exo Institute, Exo Studies Institute, because I wanted to start to offer courses online. I wanted to create a space to develop an integral framework for talking about the phenomenon and kind of coming up with, my version of an integral approach to the phenomenon that does not get stuck in any one camp, that keeps asking fresh questions, introduces new concepts and distinctions. And so over the last few years, I've had a number of like 6-month and 1-year courses with anywhere from 50 to 100 people. And, one of the longer courses, the 12-month course, there was a bibliography of 650 books that were informing the year, and the lectures that I was giving each week. I gave 42 talks that drew on these 650 books, just in an effort to say, look, here's all the stuff that's been written about these different topics. We have to get more familiar with the range of viewpoints out there and try and bring it together, because the phenomenon is so mysterious, it's so confusing, it's so elusive, that we kind of need all hands on deck. Like we need, every perspective is a worthwhile perspective that we need to consider. And so that's kind of, led me down this path. And I've just found the more I've shared and talked about all of this, how common and ubiquitous anomalous experiences are and contact experiences are. And that's given me a lot of courage to just keep kind of putting myself out there. And I eventually, a year ago, was able to launch a new master's and PhD program in integral noetic sciences, which is essentially the scientific study of consciousness. But within that program, there's a concentration you can do on anomalous studies or exo studies or UFO studies, however you want to think about it. And we can explore these topics and issues. And so we have a number of experiencers in the program. And I'm excited to have more join the program so that we can do new kinds of research, like the CE5 contacted stuff we were talking about before we began the call here today. So I'm really interested to see where this goes, because I think a lot's going to happen over the next couple of years. And so I'm ready. I'm ready to just help people think about the phenomenon and contact in a more heartfelt and intellectual and somatic way, and just ask more powerful questions about how do we hold all of this together, because the phenomenon does not fit in any box very easily, right? There's so many elements mixed into it. And I just think this is so exciting philosophically, cosmologically, scientifically, to be engaged with the phenomenon, exploring it, and having it, in a sense, be a teacher of what is the nature of reality. And this is what really led me into Dharma and contemplative practice. I really want to be able to open to the nature of reality without any filters, right? Just pure experience in a sense, right? And Dharmakaya, and just, and I think the phenomenon is also a path. Engaging the phenomenon is also a path for opening up to the nature of reality, right? And so yeah, I'll stop there. But yeah, that's kind of part of my biography of kind of how I ended up here.
Yeah, and I joke around sometimes. I say, engaging the phenomenon, sometimes contact experiences or can be a catalyst to a greater awakening.
Yeah,
As it's
they often are.
yeah, having a close encounter is it's similar in a sense of having a spontaneous awakening or a spontaneous out of body experience, and that it's an experience that you have that bridges to something to much greater. I mean, usually you have an experience like that and you are sure of the experience and that you had it, and
Yeah.
it can really have a transformative quality to it, where you're again, it's not just about, say, the UFO or the encounter or the out of body experience. It demonstrates something firsthand, something much bigger or greater or deeper, so to speak. But regarding some of those the courses you mentioned and the books, what might be some books, what might be the range, and what does the curriculum look like, um, that you have put together in kind of trying to, from the integral approach, look at the UFO phenomenon and anomalous experiences in general.
Yeah, so on the website exostudies.org, there's a resource tab, and you can go there, and there's actually a document you could download that has the bibliography of the 650 books. So that resource is available, and it's organized by different categories. In the article I wrote a couple years ago called "Our Wild Cosmos," and Cosmos with a K, there's an appendix that lists 150 disciplines, and it's organized by academic disciplines, philosophical and academic disciplines, UFO and space, disciplines, and then paranormal and esoteric disciplines. And there's kind of roughly like 50 in each category. So part of my integral approach is to look at kind of traditional academic philosophical schools of thought, look at space studies, exoplanet science, SETI research, as well as the ufological research, and then the paranormal and esoteric traditions and contemplative traditions. Right? I really feel we need to be drawing on all three of those kind of domains of knowledge acquisition. Right? And so I think sometimes in the UFO space, people will just draw on the UFO literature and maybe the esoteric literature. But there's a lot of amazing resources and people doing really good work in these other domains. They might not always be contactees or having anomalous experiences, but they're developing frameworks, they're developing research that I think is very easily used and put into service of exploring and understanding reality and the nature of the phenomenon. So a lot of my work is to kind of find those connections and the ways we can kind of repurpose good work that's been done in other domains, and kind of bring it into an exo studies context to study and explore the phenomenon. The range of books is quite vast. Everything and it's also in terms of the phenomena. It's not just looking at the UFO ET stuff. It's looking at people's encounters with celestial beings, people's encounters with nature intelligences or DMT entities. It's like looking at ghosts. Looking at precognitive experiences. Looking at studies on telepathy and psychokinesis. Right? It's looking at the full range of paranormal and anomalous experiences, and this is why I love the UFO topic. It basically contains all of that, right? It's like everything you can imagine is like kind of found in the UFO experience, right? Whether it's cryptological, whether it's social cultural dynamics, whether it's political or military. It's just kind of like Kripal even refers to this as a wastebasket problem. That basically just everything is just thrown into this pile of stuff. And it's just like, and we're like sorting through it. And, obviously that's kind of a challenge for us, but it's also exciting because, as we were talking about before, it's like there's this interrelatedness across these phenomenon. And so that's why I feel we need this multidisciplinary, metadisciplinary approach. And we're starting to see inroads. Like there is more academic interest and scientific interest in exploring the phenomenon. And so I'm really wanting to create, an educational space where we can explore the phenomenon without reducing it, right? Because I think often in scientific or academic contexts, the phenomenon gets reduced or squeezed out because of those approaches tend to be very conservative in a sense. But at the California Institute for Human Science, which is where I'm based, it's in San Diego, but it's an online program because I live in Maine. I'm teaching a course next year on UFO and consciousness. So like, what's the relationship between consciousness and UFOs? This next quarter, I'm teaching a course on varieties of non-duality. So we're looking at how does different traditions talk about non-duality. Taoism, Buddhism, Hinduism, Neoplatonism, Western philosophy, and I'm also teaching a course on animal consciousness, right? So, I mean, how wild to be, in a program where you can take a course on animal consciousness and varieties of non-duality, right?
Yeah.
Next year, I'm also going to probably teach a course on artificial intelligence and alien consciousness, where like half of the course will be looking at the examples of artificial intelligence in terms of sentience and capacity, but then also looking at what can we say about alien consciousness, like the psychology of ET, if you will, right? Or the psychology of non-human intelligences. Like what in the experiencer literature or other sources give us some insight into the psychology or the consciousness of these other beings. And then by studying AI intelligence, and alien intelligence, like what does that tell us about the nature of consciousness in general? What does that tell us about human consciousness? Right. So these are some of the courses that are offered in the master's degree and PhD program. In a few weeks, I'm launching a new 6-month course in Exo Studies Foundations, and this is an online public program. It's only like $495, so it's really cheap. I mean, a lot of one-day seminars, cost that. So
Yeah.
this is for 6 months, and I've priced it really low so that pretty much anyone can join. And there's also a few scholarships for people who might even find that price point not easy. And there we're looking at these 10 to 15 core concepts I've been developing over the last few years. Um, and- excuse me. Um, so in these public courses, I've been developing these integral concepts like metadisciplinarity is one, like we are just talking about that, like how do we draw on all these disciplines. I have this koan that I often use of taking things seriously, holding them lightly, right? So like what's our epistemological orientation? What's our mindset with engaging the phenomenon and studying the phenomenon or our own experiences, right? Like you were saying, you've had all these experiences, but you're still somewhat agnostic as to the exact nature of them, right? Did it really happen? Is it archetypal? Is it symbolic? Is it metaphorically? Is it, and maybe it's a little bit of all of that, or maybe it's multiple elements of that, right? So kind of what's our mindset? So I have these concepts, and if you go to exostudies.org and you click on the course page, look at the new course, Exo Studies Foundations, on that course page, there is a list of the 15 concepts with a kind of short description of them. So, this 6-month program is going to be diving into one of those concepts for 2 weeks. So for 2 weeks, we'll just go deep into galactic posthumanism. And then after that, we'll dive into multi-dimensional embodiment. And then we'll spend 2 weeks on doubleness, and then we'll spend 2 weeks on, another concept, right? So, and in that process, I'm going to kind of be drawing again on those 650 books that I was talking about before. And I'm going to be writing chapters because I've set this course up to allow me to write my next book, right? And so I'm going to be sending out one chapter for each of these concepts, and then getting feedback and engagement from the participants. And we already have 65 people signed up for the course. So it's going to be a great course, a lot of dialogue. And people are coming into it, and this is true for the master's and doctoral program, from a wide range of backgrounds, Christians, Buddhists, Marxists, New Agers, agnostics, and people who have had a wide range of anomalous experiences, not just necessarily ET or ufological. And then some people who have not had any experiences and are just interested and open to understanding and exploring the phenomenon. All right. And so my courses are kind of this interesting combination of like very intellectual, trying to like make sense of all of this and connect it to the literatures and the research, and then also very heart-based, and really making space for people's questions and doubts and experiences, and just really being witnesses to each other in holding the mystery.
And you mentioned the paper, Our Wild Cosmos.
Yeah.
Can you explain to people what you tried to do with that paper?
Yeah. So that paper kind of emerged out of my first year of teaching the Exo Studies material. And so as I was grappling with all of those books and in weekly conversations with a community of 50 plus people, I started, formulating these different concepts that I'm now kind of teaching more explicitly in the next course. But one of the core questions that drives that paper is what is what it's philosophically referred to, what is the ontological status of non-human intelligences, right? In other words, are they real? And if they're real, in what sense are they real? So the paper is really trying to understand and explore what's the range of non-human intelligences that seem to be reported in the various literatures. How many different kinds are there? Where do they come from, in a sense? What are their different motives and intentions? Like, if we do a meta-analysis of the experiencer literature, what does it tell us about the our wild cosmos? And our wild cosmos is a phrase I use to refer to the fact that we live in this multidimensional multiverse that's highly populated with a variety of different expressions of intelligence, right? Some are humanoid, some are non-humanoid. Some are flesh and blood, some are energetic, some are in different dimensions, some are here and been here a long time, right? So it's like there's this full range of possibilities. And even when you talk about grays, it seems that there's several different dozen types of grays. There's not just grays, right? Or if you talk about Nordics, right, or even reptilians, right? We often use these words and kind of assume it's like a singular group or species or race. But the experiencer literature actually suggests it's much more diverse and dynamic than that. There's a lot going on. So how do we come to terms with that? And so the paper kind of introduces a number of concepts about how do we talk about the realness, the ways in which these other beings are real, and how might we consider that and explore that. And so I introduce a number of concepts in that paper. And that paper, you can get to it if you go to the new course page. Somewhere on that page, there's a link that takes you to Our Wild Cosmos, and you can download it. It's about 50 pages long.
Yeah, I'll make sure to include links in the description so
Okay.
people can access it easily. And you mentioned your next book. And
Yeah.
do you have a series of books coming out?
I do. Yeah, it's like I often tend to be working on multiple projects simultaneously. So there's kind of three exo study books that I'm kind of working on, and I have been working on for several years. So I have the outlines and chapters kind of sketched out. I have a lot of content in rough draft form. So that, and this after I do this book, there's another one that I want to really focus on, probably next year.
After the three books, or after the initial first one?
After I get this first one, I'm going to use the 6-month Exo Studies Foundations course to kind of finalize the manuscript, and then I'll probably do a similar course the following year on basically kind of an integral cosmology. This book I'm working on now is basically Exo Studies Foundations, key concepts for the development of an integral theory of anomalous realities. And so each chapter, like 20 plus pages, introduces a different concept, right? And these concepts I kind of think of as key tools that we need to be able to talk about the phenomenon in better ways. And then the next book is going to be on an integral cosmology. What's the cosmology that we need to be able to hold and contain all of this? So that draws on the indigenous cosmologies. It draws on some of the quantum, physics material that's been coming out the last 2 decades, right? It's like, because we have this scientific materialist cosmology that is insufficient to basically describe our wild cosmos. So the second book really kind of looks at how do we need to understand the nature of our multidimensional multiverse in order to make room for all of these beings, all of these anomalous experiences, and so what would that look like, and how can the work that's been done prior by indigenous communities, by quantum physicists, how might that point to some of the elements that could be part of a new vision of an integral cosmology? And so the second book is going to focus on that. The other book is called What's Up with UFOs, and it's based on a website that Tom Curran and I put together, and it's going to be kind of like the smart person's guide to UFOs and extraterrestrials. And it's going to be more of kind of an introductory kind of fun book but anyway, so those are some of the projects I'm working on.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. And in regards to all that, first, what is the subtle body, and what is the relevance or importance of the subtle body when it comes to the phenomenon and anomalous experiences?
Yeah. So this is one of the areas I'm most interested in, and it's just kind of emerged over my kind of integral study of the phenomenon. Early on, like a year into this process, I started to notice a pattern with the phenomenon, and that there were certain qualities that kept showing up. One is that there's lights involved. There's some kind of light phenomenon is often involved. There's some kind of energy. There's electromagnetic energies often described. Either the car battery draining out, or the watch dying, or the camera equipment, or people's own energetic, experiences, out of body experiences, and so forth. Intelligence, that the phenomena is intelligent, and there's an experience and a perception of intelligence in various ways in relationship to the phenomenon. And it's participatory, like it's in deep dialogue, it's in deep relationship with us. So these four qualities, there's others we can name, but as I would read through the experiencer literature, as I would reflect on my own experiences, I kept seeing these four qualities. It's intelligent, lights are involved, energy's involved, and it's participatory. And so I started looking more at the energy piece, like, okay, what's the energy piece? And I started noticing that after people would have an encounter, not even necessarily a UFO ET encounter, definitely there, but even like a car crash where they have an out-of-body experience, or a encounter with what they perceived as a ghost, right? That when people have these anomalous experiences, and when there's a trigger event that kind of catalyzes an anomalous experience, then there's often subsequent to that more anomalous experiences that seem to involve energy and telepathy and essentially what the contemplative traditions refer to as the subtle body. And so when you look at the subtle body systems described by the contemplative traditions, and this is like the Hindu system, the Buddhist system, the Egyptian system, many indigenous systems and shamanic systems, they will describe anywhere from 3 to 9 bodies that we have, in addition to the physical body, that there are these subtler bodies. And many of these traditions basically claim, and I think accurately, it's in my experience, that different bodies enable you to access different dimensions of reality. So, for instance, a lot of healers, people who are involved in healing modalities like Reiki or hands-on healing, like different forms of energetic healing, they often are accessing what's called the etheric body. And so they're getting into their etheric body, they're activating their etheric body, and then they're working on the etheric body in their client, right? And so it's kind of like a tuning fork. It's like they're activating that layer in them, and that allows them to perceive, experience, and interact with that layer of the human being that they're in service of. In our dreams, where we tend to be in our astral body. When we have near-death experiences, we tend to be in our astral or even our mental or causal body, right? So different experiences of the phenomenon, what I started to notice in myself and in the literature, seem to be related to the experiences that were occurring in different bodies, right? And with different bodies come different modes of perception and different types of access to reality. And so this became really fascinating to me of like, okay, if we want to have contact, if we are having contact, then what bodies are we in, and what modes of perception are available to us in those bodies? Because each body, in effect, has its own chakra system, and that chakra system in that body has different modes of kind of perception, right? So like clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, there's these different, clairs that we have and can activate. And they seem to be related to different bodies in some cases. So a lot of the research that I've been doing has been exploring this, and I'm actually launching this super experiencer anomalous cognition research, going to be global, and we're going to basically get about 5,000 people to do the survey. From that, we'll do in-depth interviews with 100 plus people, and from that we'll probably do more in-depth work with about 50 people doing brain imaging and subtle body research to understand what makes people who are experiencing multiple different types of anomalous experience, what's allowing them to do that, like kind of what and this connects with some of the research that Gary Nolan has done, and Gary's agreed to be an advisor to the research I'm doing. There's a number of other interesting people who you would know of that are getting involved with the research. I'm connecting with the John Mack Institute and connecting with their database, right? And so there's a lot of interest in like, not just what are, the brains that, and the, kind of basal ganglia and kind of what might be going on there, but also I'm very interested in like, what are the subtle body systems that are involved, and how can we then use the contemplative traditions and there as a resource for working with and cultivating, activating the subtle body systems as a form of CE5, as a form of contact, right? And as a way of building up our capacity to have contact with a wider range of non-human intelligences through the subtle body work.
Yeah, and that that's incredibly fascinating. I can't wait to see that emerge. When is that study going to begin, and yeah, how's the I guess the public going to stay informed on that, say?
Yeah, so I'm hoping to launch it in the next 3 months or so. I'm kind of getting the advisory team in place. We have a proposal. We have some initial funding. So we're just kind of laying the groundwork. There will be a website that will give updates, and people can go to and fill out the survey, right? So and I imagine once I get it up and running, I'll probably do a round of podcast interviews to kind of get the word out, and let people know that this is happening and how they can participate. And this is also, for people who are in the PhD or master's degree program, this is one of the projects they can be involved in and help with the actual research, right? And so I'm wanting to get experiencers to help me design the research, so it's research on experiencers by experiencers, right? And so I've talked with Jay King about using the experiencer group as kind of a feedback system for reviewing some parts of the research design, right? Because I really want experiencers to feel safe and heard and seen, and feel like this research is supporting their process and their experience, and helping all of us as a community to ask better questions about the phenomenon and the contact with the phenomenon, right? And as an experiencer myself in my own ways, it feels really important to me that this is like a holistic research project that really takes into account the experiencer perspective, at kind of each phase in the process.
Yeah, I think that's long been needed. So thank you so much for spearheading and taking part in that kind of work. I think it's super important and super relevant, and I actually think it kind of goes hand in hand with what we're seeing emerge globally now, with what people can call confirmation. And
Yeah.
uh, although there are other variables and factors involved with that makes that complex within itself, um, there is a genuine opening of awareness to these subjects, and there's a lot of people to thank for that, for sure. But uh, regarding some of that, you mentioned super experiencers. So can you describe what a super experiencer is?
Yeah. So, super experiencer, and I'm still kind of in the process of fine tuning the technical definition, but just kind of informally, it is anyone who has multiple different types of anomalous experience, right? So they, might have ET contact. They might have the experience of dead people coming and talking to them. They might have precognitive dreams. They might have a few Bigfoot sightings in their life. They could be a super experiencer, a lifelong super experiencer, where they've had different phases of phenomenon, throughout their life, or they might have had an event in their 20s or 30s or 40s, and then they kind of became a super experiencer thereafter. But basically, I want to get beyond the camps, right? And so I don't. My experience in the past has been talking with people who experience nature spirits, and then they haven't had any other experiences necessarily, or talking with people who've only experienced certain types of ET contact, but haven't had other types of experiences. And I think that's all valid and important. But I'm interested in how the phenomena, all these different phenomena, are connected. And so I'm very curious about why do some people only experience angels, and some people experience elemental beings, and some people only have Bigfoot sightings. And then what's going on that some people seem to have a real mix of a lot of different types of experiences, right? So I'm wanting to study and understand super experiencers, people like Chris Bledsoe, who have such a wide range of experiences, because in a sense, to me, they represent what Kripal might refer to as like a superhuman, right? Like as a person who's activated all these other perceptual capacities, and they're perceiving multiple anomalous phenomenon, right? And so I'm just very interested as a starting point in research. Let's start there. Let's start with people, these individuals who have a wide range of anomalous experiences, and don't kind of fit into like, oh, they just have this kind of experience or that kind of experience. It's like we don't know what to do with these people because the range of phenomena they're encountering is so mind-boggling. Like it just throws our current models of reality out the window, right? So I want to investigate and understand that more.
Yeah, and it's not quite the same, but a good friend of mine, Dr. Joseph Burks, had dubbed the term prime contactees,
Right.
and
Yeah.
it was more along the lines of somebody who was almost recruited by UFO intelligence in a way,
Right.
and groomed for not only contact but communicating the reality of contact in different ways, and being able to demonstrate the relationship with the UFO phenomenon in a way to introduce it to the world, open people's minds, and facilitate contact experiences. So that's an interesting correlation, so to speak. um, so regarding um, Dharma and meditation, people here will know I'm super interested and involved with all that.
Yeah.
You are as well. So have you seen either in your own experience or by interacting with other experiencers and individuals involved in anomalous experiences and anomalous studies, um, the kind of relevance or utilization of what we can consider Dharma and Dharma practices in regards to anomalous experiences in the phenomenon?
Yeah, this area I think is underexplored, and it's partly why, in integral noetic sciences in the program that I'm doing, we're really looking at and exploring these intersections because I think the contemplative traditions and Dharma has a lot to offer us with understanding consciousness, the nature of mind, the psychic capacities, the cities that emerge often through meditative practice and the traditions. And yet, there's a way in which I think, especially in the Western context, you know, a lot of the kind of contact aspects of practice have been like kind of siphoned out. It's like they've been sanitized out of the
Yeah.
tradition, right? So we have almost like this secular Western rational Buddhism. When I've talked with Rinpoches and Lamas in the Tibetan tradition, on a number of occasions, they've shared with me how, like during a Kalachakra puja, gray aliens showed up, and they just ignored them or told them to go away. I've also heard shamans talk about how in their ayahuasca ceremonies, sometimes gray aliens will show up and they just ignore them, right? And so it's interesting that you know and these lamas and rinpoches, when I talk to them about it, they kind of like are nonchalant. They're like, yeah, there's ETs, there's these beings that you call grays, and there's other beings, and we're aware of them, but that's not what we're doing. Like we're just focused on this, right? So it's kind of like there's an acknowledgement of that layer of reality, but it's not a focal point of the tradition so much, and I know that John Churchill, for instance, is an up and coming teacher in the Tibetan Buddhist context, and he's in conversations with me, he's shared his interest in kind of this larger galactic context, and he's developing what he's calling a planetary Dharma, right? And and so I think there's emerging interest on this intersection of Dharma and the phenomenon. And there's been a couple books that have been written about Buddhism, the mind, and the paranormal. So I think there's an initial kind of set of explorations that are happening, but I think it's so ripe for more engagement and like having more serious meditators who are having anomalous experiences talk about it. And part of when I get on the soapbox, it's usually around this point that a lot of meditators are dissuaded from talking about their anomalous experiences because it's seen by the traditions often as a distraction from awakening. And while I can appreciate kind of the initial orientation of that, I think it's very outdated and I think it's problematic. And I really want to advocate an engagement with the contemplative traditions that makes room for and is curious about these experiences, these phenomenon, these anomalous realities. And I think we kind of need to integrate them more, right? Because when I'm hanging out with my Buddhist friends, they don't want to talk about ET, right? And sometimes when I'm hanging out with my CE5, ET friends, they're interested in Buddhism, but they don't really know what to do with it, or they don't see how it's related to disclosure, So I want to create a deeper dialogue, and I think there's some interesting things to explore at the intersection of these currents.
Yeah, and I think there's so much there. I mean, regarding meditation practice or Dharma practice, not only potentially could you use that technology to have contact experiences or do human initiated contact events or do CE5, but it's so applicable and in a practical way, also in kind of review and contemplation of your contact experiences you may have, or even if you're just trying to cope and come to terms with the idea of UFOs being real, right? These are methods you can use to kind of ground yourself and um, put things into perspective. So I think there's such a range of application in Dharma and meditation practice in regards to UFOs and CE5 and contact and anomalous experiences. Um, and in regards to some of that, do you have any of your own approach or thoughts on CE5 and contact work?
Yeah, I've done a little bit of it. I know a lot of people have done a lot. I know you've been very involved in that, and I think it's an exciting area, and I'm glad it's kind of like for a while it was just kind of Greer's thing. I'm glad that it's diversifying and there's a lot more, things happening. And the stuff you were sharing with me earlier that you're working on, I think is like crucial. Like, the whole idea of human initiated contact, I feel, is an important part of this next step. And I'm in a way,
Yeah.
like I feel like disclosure and discovery and confirmation is going to happen kind of in equal measure to the emergence and of CE5 protocols and initiatives and efforts, right? Like I see them as kind of going hand in hand in a sense. So the I think yeah, I at the Moreau Institute we did the 5 days of sky watching, with Chris and others, and that was fascinating. Doing the video recording of the sky and doing, the Moreau work during the day and doing other kind of, anomalous experiences to kind of create the field. So, and this is that intersection of consciousness and, the phenomenon. And, I feel like there's a lot that can be done with the CE5 work to build up. Let me start here. When I look at the contemplative traditions and I look at the magical traditions and the occult and the esoteric traditions, one thing that emerges over and over again is that the skills you need and want to have and cultivate are concentration. The ability to concentrate is super important. The ability, and that's kind of like a focus of consciousness. Also, there's like kind of like open awareness, right? The ability to just open awareness and consciousness. And if you might notice that this is basically shamatha and vipassana, right? Like those
Yeah.
are,
Yeah.
but the magical traditions talk about it in their own way. The ability to focus, the ability to open and release. Um, and then imagination, the ability to visualize and create in a very detailed way, right? So these are kind of three qualities of consciousness. There's others that show up across the esoteric, the magical, the contemplative, and the non-dual traditions, right? The importance of cultivating these. And different traditions might emphasize one more than another, or they might emphasize them in a certain order. Like in some traditions, you start with concentration and then you go to open awareness, or you start with open awareness and then you go to concentration. And so I get curious about, like with CE5 protocols, how might we weave in the capacity for concentration? Like, how might concentration amplify and support contact? How might open awareness amplify and support contact? How might imaginal modes and visualization support contact? So I'm very curious in a CE5 context, what are the things we might be doing with our mind, right? Like a mantra, chanting a mantra in a CE5 context is often a way of concentrating consciousness, right? Giving it a singular focus that everyone's doing and is amplifying the sound. But what if we add a visualization to that? What if we add a grounding somatic awareness practice, right? Like, so what are the different elements and ways of working with our embodied consciousness that might further support different kinds of contact?
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought all those points up. And I'll say from my experience, the concentration aspect is really good for kind of like the initiation process, right? And that open awareness aspect is excellent for observing things in the field, right? So there's different ways you can apply those, and different people are good. I mean, for me, different people will have different strengths in concentration or insight or open awareness, rather than others because of their basic inclinations, right? Um, but it's I see different ways that you can apply all those things in kind of contact work or CE5 work. Now, regarding some of the experience or studies that you're going to do, or that you with the super experiencers, are you going to include stuff like CE5 or field work potentially?
Absolutely. I think, and that's where, I want to like run the research design by people like you, right, to get that kind of input, like, oh, here's where you could include that. Or maybe there's, in the in-depth interview, we ask people about their experiences with CE5 events to, but absolutely, I think, that's one key element to try and understand, how that might play a role with people's, range of anomalous experiences. And, I mentioned, when we were talking before, I'd love to have a doctoral researcher, do a dissertation on CE5 and play with a number of different variables to see what kinds of CE5 processes or protocols seem to be more effective and under what conditions and what size of group, or like we're just talking about, are there certain practices we do with our mind and our awareness that might help prime the space that enables contact to occur more clearly or more regularly, or so yeah. So I think there's a whole set of research that needs to be done on CE5 stuff, and also help to really make it more well known so people become more aware of these possible modes of connecting.
And for people that might be interested in meditation, say, uh, do you have any kind of beginner's advice on how you're going to embark on that journey?
Yeah. It's really interesting when you look at the meditation is something that's been scientifically studied more than almost anything. Like, it's really phenomenal when you look at the amount of research, including like the brain scans and EEG work on meditators, and kind of what's going on in their brains during meditation. But in addition to those studies, those brain studies, there's just been a lot of research on physiology, on psychology, and essentially there are over 100 scientifically documented benefits to meditation, physiologically, emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually or transcendentally. And what's interesting about the research on meditation is, some research is using one type of meditation, another research is using another type of meditation. They're not all using the same forms or traditions of meditation, but the results keep coming in, and basically the meta-analysis suggests it doesn't matter what form of meditation you do. Pretty much any tradition of meditation is as good as another, at least initially, to kind of getting things going. And 20 minutes a day is kind of like the minimal. Like, that's kind of the amount you really want to aim for. So start wherever you have interest. Like, if you're interested in Buddhism, start there. If you're interested in other forms of witnessing awareness, or other traditions of chanting, or self-inquiry, like, there's a lot of different types of meditative practice. Most of them are going to be useful because and try and do it 20 minutes a day. So start where there's interest and energy, and then you might shift and go in and try other practices, other traditions. And I mean, I think you and I both have had a lifelong of exploration of lots of meditative practices and traditions, and it's so there's a lot to explore and consider. I think sometimes people get stuck because it's so overwhelming. Like, oh my gosh, where do I begin? Just begin by counting your breath. 1 through 5. Like, begin just looking at a candle flame. Like, there's so many. Begin by just naming the kinds of thoughts that are arising in your field of awareness, right? Like, pretty much just go where it's easiest for you to go, because usually meditation's hard, because meditation is trying to dismantle our habits of mind, right? And like, that's the point of meditation, right? Like, we have very bad habits of mind, and we want to overcome and release those, and have experiences of awareness that are not overly structured by the conditioning that we've acquired throughout our life, or even over multiple lives. So sometimes when I work with clients, I do a lot of coaching with executives and business folks, and and I just have them start simple. Start with 3 minutes a day, 5 minutes a day. Like, starting with 20 minutes a day is often too much for someone. Like, that can be a goal to get to. So start like 5 minutes a day, because it's hard to argue with 5. We always have 5 minutes, right? Like it's much harder to come up with 20 minutes. But you start with 5 minutes, you do 5 minutes for one week, and then the next week do 6 minutes. And then the next week do 7 minutes, and just slowly inch that up to 20 minutes, right? Or 30 minutes, right? Or if some days you don't have time for a full 20 or 30 minute, just do 5 minutes, right? In other words, like set yourself up for success, right? Like don't overcomplicate, like, oh, I have to meditate 20 minutes a day or it doesn't count. Because then people stop doing it because life happens and it's hard to build that momentum or maintain that momentum. So, keep it simple, just chip away at it. Start where there's passion, interest, and curiosity, and experiment. Try lots of different things. Talk to other people, find out what works for them, and just keep at it, because the more we work with our mind and our heart and our bodies in that kind of way, the better off we are. And there's so many benefits, like I was saying, like it's kind of like it's the cheapest. I mean, it's free, like wherever you can meditate, wherever you are, no matter what you're doing, right? It's very accessible. It's super inexpensive. And the benefits are just, over the moon. They're just being documented left and right. So there's so many good things that come from it.
Yeah, and another benefit I would say is it almost prepares you or helps you to cope if you're having contact or anomalous experiences. I think in some way it kind of helps condition you to be able to maneuver in those realms, so to speak. So you're, you know, whether you're trying to initiate some kind of anomalous experience or one spontaneously occurs, I think if you have that kind of practice and experience, you're more kind of well equipped
Yeah,
in being able to maneuver in those realms and
totally. Yeah.
participate more clearly rather than just being a random observer. You can be present in the moment and interactive in that way rather than just it happening to you.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah. And this is so key. Like, and this is, I often make this point in a slightly different way with my, corporate clients, where they're facing a lot of complexity in their day-to-day business life, overwhelming complexity. And so I talk about the value of meditation by whatever name is it allows them to stay present in the face of these situations that are very stressful, very overwhelming. And sometimes people just freak out. It's just hard. It's like, the stock market crashed, or the stock went down, or we lost this major client, or this person who's key part of my team, their dad just died, and so they quit because they're having to like just shift in their life, and so now this big project we've been working on, like I'm not sure if we can make the deadline, and so there's always these things that create freak out. They're not anomalous experiences, but they're a similar level of stress and overwhelm. And so I really teach about working with the breath and meditation to stay calm, present, and have metacognition available to you in the face of that situation, right? Like, how do you stay present in the eye of the storm? And the same thing is true for what you were just saying in terms of experiences with anomalous phenomenon, right? How do we stay calm? How do we stay connected? How do we keep our sensibilities about ourselves so that we don't contract, we don't misinterpret, or we reduce the amount of story that we bring to it, right? So we remain more open and receptive, right? And just stay with the process in a longer way, to see kind of how it emerges, right? So I think, this is a big part of why bringing the contemplative traditions into the anomalous phenomenon realm is so that it can deepen and support us in our encounters with the phenomenon, right? So I think there's a whole range of things that can be better understood and explored by doing this. And the contemplative traditions themselves consistently document when you do these practices, you start to have anomalous experiences, right? So that's interesting as well, even though they tend to ignore or dismiss or just kind of move on, right? But it's fascinating that these traditions and these practices of meditation actually open our awareness to start to have these experiences. So they themselves are a form of contact modality. These meditative practices are contact modalities.
yeah, and to that also is that they have their cosmology allows for these kinds of phenomena, as part of the natural universe and world, right? It's part of the experience. And one thing I like about the practices is that it has a system built in that is supportive of these kind of experiences, with like the Eightfold Path and the Eight Limbs of Yoga. I think are supportive of this kind of journey and inquiry, because it's more about the lifestyle altogether, not just you're going to sit and do a meditation and either have an experience or an awakening or whatever. It's much deeper than that.
No. And there's this other layer too, where the quality of consciousness that these beings have actually seems to echo the qualities of consciousness that are described by the masters in these contemplative traditions, of like what we ourselves are kind of wanting to cultivate in our own human beingness, right? So it's very interesting, like kind of like what's the nature of their consciousness, like what kind of meditative practices do they do, how did they get these qualities of consciousness, like how do they get these abilities, like what are the practices and traditions that they're working with, to be who and what they are in their own ability to work with time and space, and have initiate telepathic contact, right? So it's really interesting to consider, like, and maybe they don't meditate in the ways we meditate, but are there other kinds of practices they do? Like how did they get these abilities? How is it their consciousness is the way it is? Are they just born that way? Like, or are they in a developmental process, right? Are they trained? Do they go through an educational process to cultivate and develop these abilities? And are some better at some things than others, right? And so like, so it's just fascinating to try and sense into, kind of these considerations.
Yeah, and I mean, even in some of my experiences, it felt as if I was understanding or perceiving or even feeling their level of consciousness during the interaction. Like there was this kind of mind meld thing, which
Right.
was incredible. Like you're experiencing their state of being, so to
Yeah.
speak, which is incredible. But um, I know we do have a few minutes here, so I would like to ask: do you have any other upcoming projects that you'd like to mention?
No, I mean, I probably do, but it's been great to share with you and your audience, the ones that I've mentioned, the master's and PhD program. If people are interested in, being part of the next wave of, academic and research leadership on, the upcoming Exo Studies Foundations course, the 6-month community of practice space, the research on super experiencers that will be, coming, later this year, and the books I'm working on. So it's been great to connect, and I'm curious, James, for you, kind of given all the people you talk with, and just the kind of the insider view that you have, given that, and given what you see happening in the news and the momentum that's happening, kind of what's bubbling up for you around, like kind of like what's top of mind, like is it around diving into the CE5 stuff and really working on that, like, or something else, kind of like, given your bird's eye view and the way you have a pulse on this, kind of where is that taking your creative energy? What are you
Wow.
wanting to do, given everything it's like kind of you have a sense of?
I mean, considering what I is implied is kind of in process and occurring. I mean, I try to do whatever I can and work where I think is needed, and kind of the direction that I'm going in now is really trying to put information and awareness out there and available that is going to be needed is going to be needed for, as this develops, especially in regards to contact and the phenomenon, and contact work for sure. Um, but also adding context to the conversation, and perspective, so it's not an either or thing, right? So I like to add to that part of the conversation that makes, the UFO phenomenon, disclosure, uh, contact, um, kind of, it's not an either or thing. It's not black and white. There are nuances to it, and everything kind of has a place. And so how do you work with that? And what frameworks are useful for you in engaging with it directly, right? So
Yeah.
you can do all those things, if you would like to, and there's different ways to do that, but it comes down really to your perspective and your approach. And I think with everything going on, you have the UFO kind of disclosure aspect of it, even getting to nuts and bolts, and crash retrievals and such. But what are going to be the following questions that people have when they understand that UFOs for definite are reality, and humanity is being engaged by non-human intelligence, and has been, right? Because I think that people are going to realize, once it's official, so to speak, that this is nothing new.
Right.
So there's really a lot there. And I think adding context, but also kind of opening the conversation for contact, and what it is, what it means, and how to even engage with it personally. If you're looking at the news and you're like, I don't want to take whatever the media is projecting, and take that on my own, right? How can I engage with the phenomenon directly, or even engage with my research directly, and have the direct experience of whatever it is that I'm inquiring in, and and come to my own kind of, approach or conclusion or framework that's useful to me, and how to deal with this, and or even participate and help work on it.
Mm. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I always love like checking in with, someone in your situation who's like an integrator, right? You're having all these conversations, you have your own projects and passions, you have stuff coming through you. Like you mentioned right at the beginning of our connecting today, like you had this whole kind of thing happen around presenting around, and kind of next steps to take, right? And so just the ways in which that just emerges is kind of like in a flash. So I'm always curious, when someone kind of is in a situation like you that's really in conversation with a lot of interesting people in the space, kind of like how is that serving as a catalyst for your own creative expression and contributing to us as a humanity to navigate, the emergence, and recognizing that we're not alone, that this is a long-standing phenomenon, and just being part of, kind of being on this planet, this moment, this historic moment where, it seems, as far as I can tell, that in our lifetime we're gonna have confirmation, like on a, on a large global scale, right? Whether we'll have open contact, I'm hopeful, but I don't know. But it's like, what an interesting moment, and to be part of this. And and your podcast, Gauging the Phenomena, has been so great. I've just loved everything you've done with it, and just the topics and the guests, and I'm really pleased and honored to now be part of that lineup. So yeah, so just keep at it, and I'm excited to keep checking in and kind of seeing kind of what's emerging on your end. As because you yourself are your own kind of like point. The phenomena is using you as a point in this process. So it's great to get a sense of that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And my friend the Hermetic Penetrator would appreciate that perspective as well. um and yeah, and I also have to say, during one of my contact experiences, I did get like the communication or download that felt very genuine, that the UFO phenomenon wanted people to know that it was here, and that, again, it was a kind of positive message. But at the same time, even if I step away from that or detach myself from it a bit, I feel in having the different experiences and interactions that, I almost feel like a responsibility to participate in this kind of way.
Yeah.
you know I think it's an incredibly important thing. And again, ironically, I guess for me, this kind of path, and even the UFO subject and work in context has been part of my Dharma, right?
Mm. Right.
So that's, for what that is. um so I also think it's incredibly intriguing and fascinating. So I'm happy to be able to participate and be able to connect with people like you, and J. Christopher King, and Leslie Kane, and all the other wonderful people that we have come together to kind of inquire about this issue with. But do you have any kind of parting words for the audience?
Um, Before we go there, I'd love just to hear. I'm excited for this third event that you have coming up in April. Yeah, is that it's scheduled in April?
Yeah.
And great lineup. The last two have been amazing, and it was wonderful to be part of the first. And I'm also curious, do you guys have a fourth one in the works? Is there more to come after the third, or is you're not at liberty to say yet?
I mean, I'll just say, if there was a fourth one, I wouldn't be surprised
Okay.
at all.
Awesome. Um, so, in response to your final question there, yeah, I think my parting words are hearing you speak and just feeling the ways in which you're following your soul path, your dharma, you're being led by this kind of intuitive sense of this is what I need to do, this is how I can contribute, this is how I want to participate. I think you doing the show and your audience seeing you, constantly show up and kind of be an expression of kind of your core beingness, right? Like so, and I'm in my own way doing that with the Exo Studies and creating the, online, program, the public program and the accredited degrees. And so my parting words is like, I think the more all of us can just lean into like, what is our soul impulse, around the phenomenon, and how we want to participate, how we want to contribute, how we want to be in relationship to it, and to keep just leaning into it. Because I know for me, it's been very uncomfortable and on many levels. And, it's like, it's not easy. Sometimes I'm embarrassed. I don't know how to talk about it. I don't, what are people going to think? I mean, it's not like it's just all, rainbows and unicorns. It's like, it's confusing. It's like, there's so many aspects of it. But I find that the more like people like you and I just lean into it and just go, okay, this is what reality seems to be asking of me, and I'll show up and do the best I can, kind of fumbling forward, right? And so I really encourage everyone who's listening to, continue to do that in their own way and trust that impulse. Be willing to talk about your experiences or the phenomena or your interest, with people maybe you haven't yet done that. Because I found the more I've opened up, yes, there's been naysayers and there's been people that have given me a funny look, but more often than not, I've been met by people saying, I had this experience, or, I used to be really interested in that when I was younger, and I'm still interested in it, but I never admit it to anyone, right? So I found like the more we can be ambassadors for each other, and the people in our life, and that brings the taboo down. And the more the taboo comes down, the more we can talk about this in an open, curious, reflective way. And the more we can do that, the more we're going to have confirmation, discovery, disclosure, and contact. So follow your soul's impulse, right? Even when it's a little uncomfortable.
Yeah,
Those are my parting words.
for sure. Well, I really love your work. I appreciate everything you're doing. I would definitely love to have you on again soon.
Great.
Especially when you have those things, some of those things getting ready to gear up and go out and start
Yeah,
up.
yeah, that would be great.
And yeah, we definitely at some point got to do some kind of contact retreat or something like that.
Yeah,
That'd be
like
fantastic.
meditation and contact.
I
Yeah,
Yes,
absolutely.
some of my favorite things.
Yeah, like imagine doing like 2 or 3 hours of meditation during the day and then do some C5 contact work, then do another 2 or 3 hours of meditation and then do sky gazing, right? Imagine that
Yeah,
combo for 3 days, or longer. So, yeah, I
yeah,
would love to put together a retreat like that with you or others. So keep me in mind and reach out kind of if and when you're kind of ready to start to pull that together.
for sure. So thank you so much for coming, and I'll speak to you next time.
Awesome, James. Good luck. Great to
Take
see you
care.
today. Bye now.
Likewise.